All right, Jeff, really appreciate it. I'm just going to jump around to a lot of different questions here. Hopefully they kind of stay ordered.
Okay, okay.
But we'll see. So first question I had, I've looked at a lot of other fund managers that have kind of leaned into the whole solo GP movement. I think you're somebody that's bucked that trend, and you started as a solo GP, but now you've evolved into like a true fund manager managing a team. Can you talk about that decision to not go down the solo GP path, and then also some of the benefits, challenges that have come from the more scaled approach?
Yeah, so I think in 2019, you probably remember, I think Nikhil from Footwork coined the term solo GP, and it stuck. Like a lot of people thought of this new wave of GPs who could disrupt ventures being solo capitalists who could make decisions faster, didn't have like all the baggage of legacy venture firms, and to some degree that was true. Like there are the GPs who I think really stand on their own, like a lot of Gills of the world or Matt Friedman's. But I think if you look back at the cohort of most 2019 solo GPs, people took two different paths. You either stuck as a solo GP, which by the way is a really great business model for you on a personal level. Like I know some solo GPs who are making many millions of dollars. Um, who knows what their performance is like, but it doesn't matter for them. I'd come off a pretty good exit, being an early employee at Tinder. Like I had enough cushion where I was pretty clear. Like I wasn't starting a firm to pay myself a big salary. That just wasn't exciting to me. And so I wanted to really reinvest every dollar into building a team. Mainly from the view, like I thought it would be a better performing firm, from all angles. Like we would be able to cover more geographies, more verticals, and ultimately that would lead to better financial results. And so I ended up hiring initially just a chief of staff who became an investor, and then I hired Doug Dyer, who's a CFO. And I think I always tell the GPs like you'll never regret hiring a CFO early on. I think a lot of people were surprised I wanted to hire a CFO so early, but it was more like a process of trying to identify how I want to spend my time, and then also it is true as you scale your fund and become more institutional, having a CFO is really helpful. And there's a lot of reasons why, but we were really lucky there. And then we started to hire more of a mix between investors and a platform team. My view on the platform team thing for an emerging fund has changed, and so we're now more investor driven plus finance is kind of the structure of the team.
Totally makes sense. Also, shout out Doug, guy's the man. Very good at his job. I think related to that, compared to a lot of other first-time funds in your vintage, I would say that you've done a better job than most, if not all, at scaling into an institution. I know there's a ton of steps in order to make that real, but I think chapter one now, especially with the upcoming fundraise, like it is becoming a true institution. Um, can you talk about the evolution of maybe like fund one to fund two to fund three, and some actions you took along the way to scale up AUM and start competing for much larger um, allocations and start competing with other firms as well for those allocations?
Yeah, definitely. So our first one was a $10 million Silo GP vehicle. Back office was AngelList. Like it was a pretty simple setup. During that or during that fund, I was pretty lucky. Sindana invest in the fund, and I had, I guess, like a push to become more institutional from my clone team, where a lot of the things that they were asking in terms of like proper auditing, um, uh, obviously like all the financial statements, and then also just the um, kind of like the LP management side of things were pretty new to me at the time. Being like I had never had an LPAC, and so from that from that perspective, like having a single institution, in that case, a fund of funds and fund of one, really forced me become institutional because I knew if I wanted to raise from other folks, foundations, endowments, et cetera, that we just needed to to succeed at kind of all aspects of fund management. And so that was kind of the back office side. That's kind of the boring part of the question. The other side of it's just like how do you scale into kind of a lead or co-lead check within rounds. I think towards the end of funnel one, I became more confident as a lead in pre-seed deals. And so again, this is a $10 million fund. So leading a pre-seed was like writing a $500,000 check, which initially when you're investing of a smaller fund, like writing a 250K check feels a little bit uncomfortable even. Um, Fund one had enough momentum towards like the second half of the fund where I was like, okay, I can like take some real risk and I knew in preparing for fund two that I needed to show some ability to win large allocations. And so I did that. I probably led five deals in fund one with that tiny fund. And then as fund two came around, if you just look at, you kind of do like basic return the fund models, like you need once you reach like a $40 million fund size, you really do need to think about concentration and ownership. Um, so I actually had to say goodbye to like a lot of my friends who I would co-invest with because they would call me when we were doing, 200K checks. Like I stopped being able to collaborate as close with those people, which was pretty hard. Because you have to kind of like go back to first principles in terms of how you're going to source deals, how you're going to like really win outside of being this like quote unquote access fund. And so that was a big transition in fund two. And I think where we kind of land is we're like a great co-lead in most situations because we have the ability to do kind of like up to $2 million checks, but we really don't do checks bigger than $2 million often. And the way that ventures kind of like the way that industry's gone is not you're not seeing a lot of pre-seed rounds with super high quality founders that are being done at less than call it like $4 million. Like I just don't see that very often in kind of in my deal flow. And so we've kind of embraced this co-lead role. We do lead deals occasionally as a kind of more pre-seed rounds, but I'd say the bulk of the things we do are more co-lead situations.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think I didn't send this over with the questions I was initially prepping with. But I'm just curious, like you talked about Sendana coming in as anchor to Fund One. I'm just curious what the discovery process is for like a Fund One and like how quickly it moved, like what types of questions they ask, like I guess just for people that are listening or reading this, like what a true
Yeah.
institutional diligence process looks like from that type of LP's perspective. I'm just curious the type of stuff they put you through.
Yeah, it's a fun one. So Sindana at the time, and I think they still have this, it was called their Nano program, where they're doing, I think, $2 million checks in like really small micro funds. And so the introduction to Michael came through an existing LP uh, who's a guy named Sargur at CRV. And so he's just like a well-respected person who I'd known for many years. And so it actually that accelerated the process. We also on my first call with Michael, like we were already far enough in the fund where I didn't think I wanted to take any more capital from LPs. We still had the ability to do so in our LPA, but like I wasn't actively fundraising at that point. So I told Michael initially that we wouldn't be able to take their investment, and then he called me back. I think like the next day, and he's like, "Are you sure?" Again, I didn't really um, know how valuable having Sindano at that point would be, and luckily I said yes because that really I think set me up well for Fund Two, especially the Fund Two fundraise. I think having them a part of the story was really helpful. But um, in terms of diligence, I think I mean they do a ton of diligence even today on when they're re-upping on our funds, which I really respect. So they do founder calls to in fund two. They called I think almost every single one of our founders and asked for feedback on kind of how we were performing for the founders, and then so that's like pretty rigorous work. I think they called probably 30 or 40 founders at that stage. And then even today, like they're part of our fund three, they still call our founders, which I think is smart because you can, especially like 4 or 5 years in a fund, you can kind of see um, different patterns in the feedback that I think would either lead you to invest or to not invest.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I feel like you talk to different types of LPs, just have very different approaches to diligence, and it seems like the ones that really are good at what they're doing, like 90% of their diligence is just on references, whereas
Yeah.
like some of these, like I don't want to call them amateur, but like people that are newer to the asset class, I would say it's the inverse, where they do like 10% on references, if that. The rest is just like tying together the story of like high level overview of the fund, all this other stuff that can look good on
Yeah.
paper. You don't actually see what's going on behind the scenes until you talk to people that are working with you directly.
Yeah. Yeah. And they document everything as well. So in some cases, they'll share their diligence with other potential LPs, which I think again is super valuable.
Yeah. I mean, when I was at Sage, like we were investors into Sindana. And so I saw all this stuff behind the scenes and it was I think that's how we first got connected. I think it was on a reference call via them, but they
That's right, actually.
yeah, they have a pretty intense process. And they're good and organize it all. All right, jumping around a little bit. So another thing that stuck out to me, I think the first time that I met you, was just your ability to attract underpriced slash underdiscovered talent. I don't know if underpriced is necessarily the right term, but I think I mean I met Doug, gave him a shout out earlier. I've met Gabby Goldberg, who now is with I believe TCG. Used to work for you, and I met Alex and Jack. Those are just a few examples, but I'm just curious, how do you think about your process for finding these people before they become known names? I've obviously met a ton of other junior VCs. I've met a lot of other funds that really don't I don't know, it doesn't seem like they have as clear of a process for finding those people and also developing them into better investors. So I'm just curious how you think about that process.
Yeah, I think especially in Fund One. So Gabby was the first. She joined as an intern, but really became a really important part of the fund at the time. And the yeah, I'm a big writer, as you know. I should write more, but I really care about that part of kind of the evaluation process. And Gabby had gone to Israel and done, I think, like a 4 or 5 month period where she mapped out the entire Israeli tech ecosystem and wrote just this really amazing blog post. And that was actually enough to make me want to hire her because I saw just a lot of um, rigor in her thought process and the ability to communicate well. I just thought was really impressive. I think she was 20 years old or 21 at the time. So she came on, and actually, I think Gabby gave me confidence that I knew how to evaluate talent, right? Like um, you have a great experience like that, and you kind of want to do that again. And so we end up hiring a few more junior folks in the current fund. Some of it, you said underpriced, like some of it does come down to budget. Like I'm not going to be able to hire 3 or 4 GPs from brand name venture funds. So you do need to kind of create this development program within the fund. Um, I'd say we've done it right most of the time. In some cases, we've had to make tough decisions to move on from folks, and I think we've become very comfortable with that as well. Just and that's something I had to learn quickly too. Like you don't always get it right, but you also want to build like really cohesive teams. And so there have been cases where we've hired talented people, and for whatever reason, they just don't. It's like a sports team, right? They don't know their position or they don't play well with their teammates. And so you're always kind of looking for these different pieces you can put together to build a great team. One characteristic that I think you might appreciate is so on our current investing team, there's 3 of us, and the other 2 folks, Jameson and Alex, were both division won college athletes. And so that wasn't intentional, but I say that like they work extremely hard. It's hard for me to keep up with them because they're really working like almost like probably what they did when they were athletes, and it's like it's pretty intense at times. And so I look for a certain intensity in people, and in I think with unproven talent because Jameson's not young necessarily. Like they have something to prove, right? And so I like working with people who have something to prove. I feel like I have something to prove too. So it's not like all of us are in the same position together.
Yeah, I think it's really smart. I mean, I think I kind of think about finding those people the same way. It's like really hard for me to trust somebody without having like some proof of work, or at least like something that I can like reference that they've written on the internet. Like that just helps me get up to speed on like what their beliefs are, their values are, and just how they think and synthesize information. Which is kind of counterintuitive to the world I grew up in. Like I was told in middle school, high school, like especially going into sports, is like you didn't want to have anything on the internet. Like you were scrubbing your Facebook clean. Is like anything that could potentially be, I don't know, perceived by the wrong people. They're perceived wrongly by the wrong people would be like there's downside risk. And I think now, especially as a junior person, I mean, even it's like a more mid to senior level person, like I just think there's an asymmetric risk or asymmetric upside to sharing your thoughts on the internet. And I would say that massively outweighs the risk of somebody like reading it and getting the wrong interpretation of you. And so I think about it the same way. Like I feel like finding those people, I don't know, it's like refreshing to hear how those people think, and it just helps with building a team. So we're on the same page there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think especially now, like you have to have strong beliefs to hire people and to stand out and venture. And so, I think there's a moment in time where a lot of people I think were worried to share stuff online out of fear of saying the wrong thing. I think the zeitgeist is completely gone the other direction. The There is always a slight filter, especially when you're a newer manager. Like you can't say the same things that I don't know, Doug Leone or Peter Thiel say. Like you have to have some filter, but I think you have to kind of like stand for something and be um, have like some point of view that's different from other investors because that's really like what people are investing in is your point of view on the world and ability to invest against that belief system.
What percentage, just curious, like what percentage of investors right now, especially seed stage investors, do you think have truly unique, differentiated opinions? Or how much I think I was listening to a podcast that you did recently where, or maybe this was like a year ago, where you were talking about the amount of AI generated content that you believe is out there. I think that number has probably doubled or tripled since you gave that quote. So I'm just curious, like I feel like I listen to a lot of repetitive thoughts. Like I think it's hard to find people that are truly differentiated with their views on seed investing. But I'm just curious how you think about it or how you're seeing it.
Yeah, I think probably if you look back at seed investing, 15 or 20 years ago, there wasn't as much information online or online around like what people were doing or how to be a great seed investor. And so there was, I think, more independent thought historically. Right now, like everybody wants to be a seed investor, and I think the way to do that is often to kind of conform to what the industry wants you to invest in or wants you to say because that's a faster track to being accepted. But if you take a longer term view of your career and have a unique thesis or unique areas you're investing in, so I think, and you're right, like you have to be right, obviously. That ends up, I think, separating you from that entire group of people. And so the hard thing is getting that kind of unique thesis right because I always like liken it to being like a beat report, like a journalist covering a beat. And if you're like covering the right um, topic at the right time, your career kind of like propels itself forward. Like there's a ESPN reporter Brian Windhorst who he knew LeBron in high school, right? And so he's like, I'm just going to cover this guy because I have a feeling he's going to be special in his career. And he's literally been following LeBron James for 21 years, and he's now like one of the faces of ESPN, right? But if you had picked like some other player, right, he probably like his entire career he might still be reporting on high school basketball
Yeah.
in Akron, Ohio. And so I think about that a lot for venture. Like you have to find the right team or people even to line yourself with.
Yeah. There's probably a reporter out there who's following. I don't know if you remember Sebastian Telfair. He's
Yes, exactly.
really banking it all on Sebastian Telfair being that guy and probably
Well,
looking.
how many VCs have literally made their careers just backing Elon? Like
I
if you
mean,
were, yeah, that's like a huge um, cohort of successful investors starting maybe 2005 or so have just been Elon investors their entire career.
yeah, probably right. I mean, we had an internal discussion about that when I was still with the family office. And we're like, is the best use of the family's capital to invest in emerging managers, invest in all these different complex strategies and venture, or just give Elon Musk your money and watch him double, triple, whatever it. And I don't know if we ever got final conclusion on that, but it does seem like everything he touches turns to gold. So who knows? We kind of touched on this earlier, but aside, like related to writing, aside from the obvious opinions shared through writing, are there any non-obvious traits you've noticed about people that consistently publish their work online that maybe translate over to becoming a good investor? Like things I was thinking through were just like curiosity, searching for truth, diminished fear of being wrong, but curious how you're thinking.
Yeah, I think the real purpose of writing things online, if you're a VC, um, is to kind of find your people and create a flywheel within a certain topic or theme that people begin to associate you with. And so if you were Tom Toon guys writing about data for the last 15 years, like guess what? 300,000 people who read his newsletter every couple of days, like really think of Tom as being like the data guy. And so if you were to really apply yourself and pick something that you care about and become kind of cut through the noise and become the domain expert for whatever that topic is, that's a huge advantage in your career. I think a lot of people want to be Tom Toon guys and say they want to start a blog and they get they get 6 months in and they just other things become a higher priority. Like it's really hard. And if you look at even like Roger Ehrenberg or Fred Wilson, how they started their careers or became really successful, like it was just really applying themselves and being consistent with their writing. It's something to really aspire to if that's like the strategy you want to take. Or I know even they call it a strategy is even the wrong thing. Like I get the sense that like Fred or Roger would have just done it because they felt the need to write and share their thoughts. That was like their creative outlet. So a lot of VCs, I think now do things that are unnatural to them, or um, they view it more as being like a part of the job, unless like something that they actually are passionate about. And so I think that's where you get the generic content and writing, and people can just see through that. Like especially from like the GPs at larger multi-stage firms, like if you're getting an email from someone, a newsletter email a couple days a week, and it's really long form content, like there's no way they're writing that themselves. Like they have a intern or they're using AI or whatever, and you're like human instinct is like your like bullshit detector goes up, and you're like, I don't like I'm gonna stop reading that person, and it just takes one of those lazy posts to kind of turn you off, right? And so I just always encourage people to write about things they would be writing about this if it was just like their journal, and then to publish that publicly. And most of the time, that ends up being the best content, not the things where like if I just have this headline and this image and this whatever, like people usually don't respond.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I feel like we played around with like a million different types of content for Confluence, and like some of it is news related, some of it is like business recaps, some of it is just like what I'm generally interested in venture, and like by a pretty wide margin, what I'm generally interested in venture and like what I'm excited about writing about is the stuff that performs the best, just because I think the authenticity is typically what's lacking from a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's like not all of it's AI generated content, but I think like taste is a mode now. Um, Whereas like I don't know, everything can look professional with AI and content generation, but like I don't know, I just think there's something to be said about like your specific taste and how you verbalize like topics that you actually care about. So I don't know, that's something I've been thinking through too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also a willingness to say what other people are thinking but are afraid to say. Often, if you're able to kind of hit some nerve that like everybody's thinking, but for some reason nobody has articulated that idea, it ends up being a pretty good, pretty good recipe for success.
Yeah, totally agree. Um, I was listening to another talk that you were giving, and you mentioned something about funds staying relevant by offering timeless value props. I'm just curious how you think about timeless value props for funds, and do you think any of these are becoming more or less important over the coming years?
Yeah, I think my view on this has probably changed a bit. Like, I think there isn't really a timeless value proposition unless you're Sequoia and you've been doing this for 40 years and people just know that you're an incredible institution and someone who will be a good partner. Um, I think what's harder to do in venture and what we're certainly trying to do is to continue to update your beliefs about where the world's going and um, be pretty unapologetic about adjusting or upgrading your strategy as the world changes. And so the and the world's changing so fast that within any given deployment period of a single fund, like everything about what you thought was true kind of when the fund started is normally challenged. And so like the I just like to just like look back on so we started investing fund two in 2021. And if you just look at like the facts on the field at that time, it was like fintech was a super hot category. Crypto was obviously exploding. There was no like OpenAI API or like ChatGPT as a concept wasn't even around. You had different people in Washington D.C. like all these things, and so if you're planning a fund around a vertical or a thesis, like you better be sure that every couple of years you're willing and able to update like everything you believed, and then the challenge is like how do you like maneuver the fund or how do you stay relevant to whatever that next cycle might be? And I think where people can get stuck is just saying, hey, like we were this type of fund, and that's what people know us for. Therefore, we can't change. And so, if you were to look at like if you were to look at software companies and say like, hey, we're just going to do this for the rest of our company's life cycle, you would die quickly. And I think venture funds, like I like to think of them as being like software companies or operating systems. And if you don't upgrade your operating system every couple of years, like you're probably going to die pretty quickly. And so we've done that at Chapter One. It's been admittedly like it comes with pain sometimes because you have to do the hard work of kind of like updating your belief system, and you have to communicate that with your limited partners and with the broader market. And I think that can be challenging.
What do you think is related to that? Because I totally agree with everything you just said. I think from LP's perspective, previously, we were looking at all these funds that were really thematic and they had a view of the world and what the world was going to look like in 10 years. And now I think over the last year or two, you're just seeing the rate at which change is happening. And I just think I think it's impossible to take a 10-year view anymore. Like you can like directionally see where the world is going, but to say like it's best for us to put all of our dollars into this one category, I just think that's really hard. Um, I'm curious if your views on that have changed or just as like if you have specific beliefs around funds branding themselves as like we only do these thematic investments and we exclude the rest.
Yeah, I think it can go in both directions. Like I have been at enough kind of LP type of events where like there's a conversation around like the death of the generalist venture fund. And I think if you look at like the best, most enduring institutions, they are pretty generalists in what they do. So if you look at Sequoia or Benchmark or Thrive, Andreessen, et cetera, I think all of them have a pretty specific strategy that um, they've been able to execute on for a number of years that makes them different. But none of them are saying, "Hey, we're like this is our vertical and this is what we're doing." From a emerging manager point of view, I think if you're whatever vertical you choose, if you go down that path, is really being like your go to market, and then you have to prove over time that you have the right to expand. Being if you were, I don't know, if you were a healthcare investor and start with that, there's probably adjacent categories that you can go invest against as you discover new things. And then you need to kind of update your messaging and be able to communicate that in a really effective way. But I think just doing one thing for, an entire venture firm's life cycle can be really limiting. Where a lot of people do have success when they verticalize, it's just I think it does make fundraising for an emerging manager a bit easier because you land in like an LP's inbox and it's like, oh, they're like the B2B SaaS fund or they're the hard tech fund and LPs have these, obviously have their own portfolio construction that they're trying to get to. And from an LP's perspective, you probably want things that are pretty uncorrelated within your venture portfolio, so you have a good diversity of exposure. But if you were to ask me, like, is that the best way to build a venture firm? I would say absolutely not. But it does get you in business.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's what you see people like Andreessen doing, where they scale up AUM and then they kind of build out dedicated verticals for each, and they each run their own separate fundraising processes. Um, but yeah, I think it's just really hard to scale into a massive organization just focusing on one thing for decades at a time. Um, what's the worst part about venture that nobody talks about?
Um, I think I think there's like a certain transactional side of venture that just has become more clear to me over the past, probably 3 or 4 years. Just as the asset class has gotten more professionalized and there's more competition. There, I don't think there's like enough really deep thinkers who, like approach this from a perspective of learning and kind of like developing a unique thesis. And so there's a lot of groupthink. I think venture, I think a hard part too is like there's a perception of VCs, often from founders, that can be correct for like a certain percent of VCs being, I think there's like in some ways, like there's been a negative relationship between founders and venture firms, at least online, that has become like a part of it's almost a meme, right? Like the lazy VC. And so I kind of, when I read stories about VCs who are doing shitty things, I take it pretty personally because it ends up impacting everybody within the industry. And so, yeah, those are probably two things. And then, yeah, maybe the third part that, I think there's a perception that venture is like a really glamorous job. And when you're an emerging manager, it's pretty far from being glamorous. And so, if you were to just like really look at the day to day of starting a fund, raising your first fund, setting up legal operations, et cetera, like it's pretty it's pretty like taxing work that takes you far away from investing. And so I'd say that's probably the last part.
Yeah, I think there's a last one I can resonate with. Like I have all these friends that work in banking, and they're like, "Yeah, I want to like switch over to VC private equity. It seems like much sexier." It's like I promise you, it's not as sexy as you think. But um, last question I had: are there any other emerging managers that really impressed you over the last few years?
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch. And some I'm an LP in a handful of funds, so but yeah, I think there's probably a couple that come to mind. One, um, I've always liked Compound and Mike Dempsey. I think like they're very thesis driven, which I think is hard to do well. Same with Kal Samani at Multicoin. Like I think Multicoin within crypto has been exceptional in having this Solana thesis that really became true. Um, was really bold and brave at the time because they pissed off a lot of people within the Ethereum community. Um, Ethereum Ventures, like I think Tom I mentioned before, he's been a longtime friend. What I appreciate about them is just like they're highly concentrated. And so I think in any given fund they have 12 to 15 positions, which is really unique. I think Conviction, Sarah's done a great job of like being right again to like the LeBron Brian Windhorst point about like a huge thematic wave that she kind of started her fund at like the perfect time to be a part of that big wave and has really I think done a great job. And so those are a couple that come to mind.
To Revel. Yeah, I don't know Multicoin. I know the others. They're super impressive. That's all I have, man. I think this has been a ton of fun. I really appreciate you hopping on and going through all these with me, and also just like allowing me to go off the cuff on a few of these without sending over questions beforehand. Dude, if there's anything I can do to return the favor, please let me know.
Cool. Yeah, happy to do this. It was fun, man. It's good to catch up.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, if you're ever in Austin, let me know. Next time you go, I'm overdue to plan a trip there. I'm also overdue to go out west. And next time I'm in California, I'll give you a shout.
Cool, man. Okay, we'll talk soon.
All right, I'll see you, Jeff.
Okay. Bye.